All right, we've got a tutorial here about using Microsoft Excel to do equations, save you some time in calculations, cell references, and filling something down. We're also going to teach you how to make a graph with Excel. So let's get started. In this top box, we're going to teach you these skills here, and in the bottom box, we're going to teach you about graphing. All right, up here, let me give you a scenario here. We've got a racetrack. And there's 7 different racers on this racetrack. The racetrack starts at 86 meters, an 86 meter mark on the ground, and it ends at 95 meters. So we need to figure out the distance of the track. And then we're going to look at the times in which these racers finish that track, and that'll allow us to find the average speed. So let's go ahead and get started here. To find the distance traveled, I know you're thinking, oh, it's just 95 minus 86. That's 9 meters long. And you're exactly right. But let's just figure out how to do this with equations. We're going to select that cell, and we're going to, whenever we want to do an equation, we have to start with equals. That tells Excel we're going to punch in an equation here. Now I could type in 95 minus 86, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use a cell reference. I'm going to say it's this cell, 95, minus that number, 86. And I hit enter, and it automatically calculates that for me. Now, I might be thinking, what's the point of that? Why not just punch in 9 and move on? Well, the benefit of that is if someone comes along later and wants to change this cell and says, oh, it didn't actually start at 86, it started at 82. Watch what happens to this cell here. It recalculates it based on that change. And that's a really nice benefit. If you're ever making a really big spreadsheet, you don't want to have to recalculate everything by making one change earlier on. So that's an equation, and we referenced 2 different cells. Now I'm going to come over here and teach you a different skill. It's called filling. Instead of typing in racer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I've started the pattern racer 1, 2, 3. I highlight those 3 cells by clicking the left button and holding it down. And you see that bottom right corner kind of became a little black square right there. I'm going to take my mouse and move over top of that, and you'll see my cursor changes its appearance. If I click the left mouse button and hold it down and then drag down, you can see it's figuring out what those cells should be. If I release now, it automatically fills that pattern all the way down. If I'd had a 1, 1, 1 and I filled that down, it would do 1, 1, 1, 1 the rest of the way. So it continues whatever pattern you have if you select those first 3 cells. All right, so now we're ready to go. I've got the distance traveled, I've got the time for each racer. I want to find the average speed for each racer. You might remember that the equation for that is speed is distance over time. So let's punch that in here. Instead of typing in 9 meters divided by 4.5 seconds is 2 meters per second, and then typing in 2, I'm going to let Excel do that work for me. So it's an equation. I start with what? Yep, an equals sign. Equals. Speed is the distance divided by the time. And it calculates that average speed for me. Now, I could go through and do the same thing here. I could type equals the distance divided by the time, and it'll do that for me as well. But rather than doing that, I want to fill this equation down, let Excel just automatically do all those the same. But we're going to run into a problem here, and that's going to bring up the idea of absolute cell reference. Let me show you what happens here. If I grab that bottom right corner and fill down, it's just going to copy that equation all the way down, and it's giving me zeros. Well, 9 meters divided by 2.8 seconds doesn't give me 0 meters per second. So something's wrong there. Let's select this cell and see what it's doing. The equation for that cell is cell C8 divided by F6. C8 is right here where my cursor is. There's nothing there. That divided by F6, that's right here. That is the time I wanted to use, but that's not the distance I wanted to use. Well, what happened? Well, if you notice this one, that equation was this cell, C7, divided by this cell. Distance divided by time. When I took this equation, filled it down, it moved all those cell references down one spot. So it moved the time from this to this, which is what I wanted it to do, but it moved the distance from this cell to this cell, and there's nothing there. So I've got to do what we call an absolute cell reference. I want this cell, the distance, to always stay at that cell and not move down. So here's what I'm going to do. Let me delete those equations. What I'm going to do is this. Instead of saying it's just C7 divided by F5 and dragging that down, I'm going to say, you know what? It's always cell C7. It's absolutely that cell. Do not change that. So I'm going to put a $sign before the C and a $sign before the 7. And that's going to keep it fixed at that cell. That won't drag down to this one. But for the F5, I want that to just stay that way because I want it to drop down and use F6 and F7 and F8 as we go. So that doesn't affect this one at all, but when I drag this down now, you'll notice it works out. So it's saying it's still C7 over F6, C7 over F7, C7 over F8, and so on. It's keeping that cell absolutely right there and not changing it. That's called an absolute cell reference when you use those $signs. Good to go? Excellent. Now let's talk about graphing. What's going on here is I have a distance and a time correlated with it. So this tells you where a vehicle is in reference to a starting point and how long it took to get there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in these other things here. It's a 5-second interval, so let's just do our fill thing we did before. Instead of typing in 15, 20, 25, and so on, I'll let Excel do that for me. Now I'm going to make a graph. I'm going to select my data, and I'm going to come up here to Insert, and I get to choose the chart type I want to use. You might think we're going to do a line. I've had issues with that in the past, so we're going to go with Scatter. And now you're going to select Scatter. You can have a curved line, or in this case, let's do a straight line connecting those points. And it's going to guess at what I want the graph to look like. It's pretty good. I mean, it's got my times as my X values and my displacements as my Y's, and that's what I wanted. I don't like that title. I don't really need a legend because there's only one set of data on here. So we're going to do some modification to this, and I notice there's no axis labels either. So what do? Well, if you go to this Chart Tools area, this green part up here, I can change some different things up here, like select different data if I want to, but I'm going to change the layout. And when you go to this section, you'll notice you can change the chart title or the axis labels or the legend, and a lot of things you can change. Let's do the chart title. You can have no title, you can center it over the display, or you can center it above the whole chart. I kind of like that how it is, and it was already there. To change the name, I can just, oops, sorry. I'm just going to type over this. It's a DT graph for a car's motion. Great. That one's done. Next, axis titles. Let's change the horizontal or the x-axis. I don't want it to have no axis label. I want to have a title there. And let's call that time in seconds. And let's come up and do the vertical axis now, or the y-axis. And that was my displacement in meters. So graphs come together. Moving across legend, or key you might call it. We don't really need one because there's only one set of data, so let's just get rid of that. That gives a little more room to look at. You could label your data. We're not going to do that. Axes, you can change the spacing of these increments here. We look like we're okay with what we have. Grid lines, you see only horizontal ones on here, but it'd be kind of nice to have some vertical ones as well. So let's do just the major grid lines. I don't want them really jam-packed in there. And that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that graph. So that's how it works. Those are the basics. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Feel free to look back if you need help with something else.